but they've already made their mind up. I attended a talk-in at the European Parliament last year where one of the charities I'm involved with, the Radiation Research Trust, presented. And it was clear from the conversations that went on that you've now got the situation where the European executive are saying things like, look, we don't know, we rely upon ICNIRP to give us best advice. And you had the mobile phone industry getting up and saying, we do whatever we're told to do. If the government tells us to do this, that or the other, we do it. So it's not our fault. We're complying with everything we're asked to do. And ICNIRP then got up and said, we are only recommending the thermal effects of the mobile phone. Any other effects, nothing to do with us. So you've now got this perfect situation as the disaster unfolds, which it will, nobody is to blame. Everybody is doing what they think they're meant to do, whilst all of them are rubbishing these scientists who are showing that there's a problem. And having been involved in these scientists, and having been involved and sponsored a conference recently, when you listen to other parts of the world, you realise although there's opposition in some countries, there's nothing like the opposition that there is in the UK. So you've now got Sweden, who recognises electrical sensitivity. You've got Canada, who now recognise electrical sensitivity. You've got France withdrawing Wi-Fi from all public buildings. How many people knew that? I saw one little article in the Sunday Times about it. It was about that big. And the way they dealt with it was, the French, are they mad? That's how it was dealt with in the UK. You've now got a number of companies in Europe who are reducing the levels of emissions that are allowed from masts. The UK has the highest permitted levels of emissions in the world. Other countries are now beginning to listen to these scientists. These scientists have presented to the European Parliament, to the French government, to the German government, to the Belgian government, and all those governments have listened. They have responded by getting ICNIRP to come in and explain to them their side of the argument. And what they're now doing is changing the rules because they are sufficiently frightened at what they're seeing to recognise that ICNIRP might be wrong. Meanwhile, we take a precautionary approach in the UK. Please tell me what precautions we take in the UK. We're installing Wi-Fi in all our schools. We're going to put smart meters in every single building in the UK because it's energy efficient. We do nothing that takes a precautionary approach. If you are affected mildly by a phone, can you imagine how your children or newborn babies might be affected by electromagnetic fields when they have no resistance at all? They have no, their immune system is only just being developed. 1/3 of babies now born in the UK are born with problems. And by problems, I mean skin disorders, eating disorders, etc., a whole myriad of different disorders. And I'm not saying it's caused by electromagnetic fields, but I'm saying it might be. And we should do some serious research to find out whether that might be causing our children a problem. Because it has been proven, both in laboratory and in research, that male sperm count is being damaged by people who are the most heavy mobile phone users. Research across 8 universities in Europe found again and again and again that DNA, double-strand DNA breaks, were caused by microwaves significantly lower than the levels that you are putting to your head. And what does that do? That's the precursor to cancer. So the government knows all this, but it doesn't want to worry you. It doesn't want you to panic because it recognises if you start panicking about your mobile phone, you might even start panicking about the mast. And it doesn't want you worrying about the mast because you have no choice in the mast. You have a choice as to whether you use a mobile phone, but you don't have a choice about a mast. And if you think about it and use your own logic, which is worse for you? Put a mobile phone to your head for an hour a day? Living next to a mast for 24/7. 24/7, you're being irradiated. Now, I am seeing studies where people who live in hotspots around masts are getting cancer. The government does not want to do any research in that area. There was a programme on television about 2 years ago where Sir William Stewart spoke up about Wi-Fi in schools and said we should not be doing this. And the whole programme was ridiculed, and indeed the BBC issued an apology after the programme because it was biased, because the mobile phone industry got at them. But think about it. Sir William Stewart was the head of the Health Protection Agency. This is the guy that sees all the research. And he is saying, he's now just finished his term, and he is saying he will not allow his grandchildren to use a mobile phone. He has seen the research, and when he presented at our conference, he said that he was significantly more worried now, this is 3 years ago, than when he wrote the Stewart report in 2000. And the research that he is seeing should make us take a precautionary approach. And he is being ignored as we roll out Wi-Fi and we roll out smart meters to everybody. Can I ask somebody to turn on their phone? Can you make a call? Can you just press it to anywhere you'd like and see whether I can not cripple myself? Just press it anywhere. All that device does, it converts microwaves into noise. So it gives you an idea of when you are in an environment where there are microwaves. And as soon as you turn it on, that's what happens. And what was interesting to me when I got this machine, because I'd been reassuring my wife for years, you know, your microwave's perfectly okay, don't worry about it, it's well shielded and whatever. You stand the other side of the room and turn this on, and you're irradiated by your microwave. And, you know, the question that you need to ask is, you know, people are usually stood next to their microwave, women particularly, which height have they got it at their breast, and what's happening with breast cancer? And again, I'm not saying it causes it, I'm saying we should investigate it. We should try and find out. And the government's attitude to the research in this area, and many other countries, is not to do any research at all. The only research that they will do is that they already know the answer to. And the way that I describe that is we've been campaigning for a little while about Wi-Fi in schools. So the government has now agreed to spend £500,000 on research. What are they going to do? They're going to check to see if the levels of Wi-Fi in schools exceed the permitted limit. Now, I can already tell them the answer to that now. It doesn't. It's not that they exceed the permitted limit, it's because the limit is set too high. So they're going to spend £500,000 on that research, and we could tell them the answer tomorrow. But what they're going to do once they've got the answers is use it to reassure you that they've done the research and it's all okay. Because you're not going to look at the research and check out what they've actually done. You're just going to be reassured that everything's okay. How many of you saw the newspapers about a month ago about Interphone? It was actually reported in the UK, which is a bit more than it normally does. There has been some research that's been doing over the last 10 years. The Interphone results were meant to have been published in 2005. Sorry, they were already in 2005, but they didn't publish them. They were published a couple of weeks ago. Now, the reason they were published a couple of weeks ago is because they've been rowing about them. They've been rowing about the interpretation. Now, can you imagine why it would take 5 years if it had been good news? And what you've now got is the Interphone studies have been reported across the world, And depending upon which country you live in will depend upon what you've read. And the headlines in some countries is Interphone proves there's a problem with mobile phones, and in the UK, Interphone proves that there's no problem with mobile phones. But what is actually interesting from what has been said in the UK is that there might be a hint of a problem for excessive users. Now, if you go into the detail of the Interphone study, have a guess what an excessive user is. What would you say an excessive mobile phone user was?
By their definition.
Yours. What would your definition? What's an excessive phone user?
2 or 3 hours a day.
Right. 1 hour a week. Now, what does that do? That's very clever, that is. Because what that does, it mixes up all the light users with the non-users. It mixes up all the light users with the heavy users. So you can't make the comparisons. That's no accident. That's quite deliberate. And the other thing that they've done is they have decided to ignore completely the cordless phone in your house. How many of you got cordless phones at home? You have a little transmitter there and it's bathing you in electromagnetic fields, microwaves all day long. So again, what they've done is they've ignored that. They've pretended, well, that's not a mobile phone, but it is. And again, I would argue that's not an accident. Because if you mix up people who are using a cordless phone and maybe not using a mobile phone at all, what you've got is exactly the same results as somebody who would be a heavy user 1 hour per week. So they've gone out of their way and done a brilliant study to make sure that they prove nothing. Might be a hint of a risk for very heavy users of 1 hour per week. Now, the reality is, a scientist called Leonard Hardell in Sweden is showing from his studies that if you use a mobile phone for 10 years, there is no increased risk of a brain tumour. 10 to 15, it doubles. 15 to 20, it trebles. 20 to 25, it quadruples, and so on. And if you then start using a mobile phone as a child, where your skull is so much thinner and it permeates the whole of the brain, it goes up by 10 to 20-fold. So watch what happens over the next 10, 15, 20 years. But the use of a mobile phone in causing brain tumours will not be the issue. That will be minor. Electrical sensitivity, that will be minor. The issue that you should really watch out for, apart from the bird population, the bee population, etc. being decimated, what you should watch out for is senile dementia. Because if you're damaging brain tissue, that's what you're doing. You're damaging your brain. And as somebody who's electrically sensitive, I promise you, I know that you damage your brain. Now I'm going to be asked to shut up in a second, and you can ask questions. And all I wanted to say, to some extent, was, well, where's it got me with compromise and coalition, etc.? Well, what I found out very quickly was that I had to compromise, and I had to use the experience of other people, because the UK body is probably the most rigid in terms of making sure that the truth doesn't come out. But I now work quite extensively with people like me in other countries and scientists in other countries. And I would just quote, this is a document from Switzerland. This goes to every single person in the population. And it says, I quote, "It has been scientifically established that intensive non-ionizing radiation," that's what you're using on your mobile phone, "is harmful to our health. But certain biological effects also occur at exposure levels well below internationally recommended limits." So these are not nutcases. This is the government saying, we've got a problem. So it's only in the UK that I'm being regarded as a nutcase. The European Parliament voted at the end of last year, after listening to us, and voted by 600 votes to about 12 to take a precautionary approach and recognise electrical sensitivity. The UK government has decided to ignore it completely. I could go on for hours, but I won't, because you've got to ask some questions, hopefully. I retire in a few years' time. The worst place imaginable to be when you're electrically sensitive is a hospital. Believe me, it's a nightmare. And I had to go in and out of hospital in Liverpool where my mother was dying because the place was covered in masts. And I have a fear of going into a hospital. I can't, you know, for more than 24 hours it will be a nightmare. So somehow or other over the next 2 years or 3 years, I will put an enormous amount of resource into trying in the UK to bring the research from around the world into the homes of people and the politicians. And I work with a number of MPs who are trustees of our charity, and I work with a number of scientists, including the head of the Russian equivalent of the National Radiology Protection Board, who says, if I was in Russia, I would be suffering from microwave sickness. And in Russia, they're now building shielded rooms in hospitals for people who have electrical sensitivity. That's how civilized the Russians are compared with the British and the Americans, who make an awful lot of money out of this technology. So, one of the things I'm trying to do, and I've spoken to the presentation group, is to put a website up, and I will try and deal with it in a way that hasn't been dealt with in the past, because it's either incredibly emotional, and it tends to be rubbished, or incredibly scientific, and tends to be rubbished. And I'm hoping to try and bring the two together to explain to people what is happening, but also to help people, as I do now. I'm a trustee of ES UK, which helps people who become electrically sensitive. We have about 2,000 people in the UK now who are very badly electrically sensitive. I mean by that they can't work, and they can't go into environments that you can. There are millions of people, and I repeat, millions of people across the planet who are electrically sensitive. This is happening in every single society where the mobile phone has been produced. Please take action. And there's a lot of simple things that you can do to safeguard yourself.